Okay, now we move into our gospel passage, which comes from Luke chapter 17, verses 5 through 10. The apostles said to the Lord, "Increase our faith." The Lord replied, "If you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you would say to this mulberry tree, 'Be uprooted and planted in the sea,' and it would obey you. Who among you would say to your servant who has just come in from plowing or tending sheep in the field, 'Come here immediately and take your place at table'? Would he not rather say to him, 'Prepare something for me to eat. Put on your apron and wait on me while I eat and drink. You may eat and drink when I am finished'? Is he grateful to that servant because he did what was commanded? So should it be with you. When you have done all you have been commanded, say, 'We are unprofitable servants. We have done what we were obliged to do.'" Okay, we'll get to the end here. I think there's a little bit of a discomfort when it comes to this, looking at this particular parable, given our current church context, I guess. But I actually want to look at something first. So the line here, when it says the apostles said to the Lord, "Increase our faith." I think that this is a response to what Jesus says right before this passage. So if you remember last week, we had the parable, or the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, and like the bosom of Abraham and the chasm that is between us, etc. Then we jump into chapter 17, but we skip the next 4 verses, and in those 4 verses, Jesus says something that I think is just worth our time, which is that he says, temptations to sin are sure to come, but woe to the person through whom they come. And then he talks about how actually, like, it would be better for that person who leads others into temptation for a great millstone to be tied around their neck and they be thrown into the ocean than that they would lead somebody into sin, especially one of these little ones that he's talking about, one of his disciples. But then he says this: look, you got to be on the alert. If your brother sins against you, rebuke him, go and correct him. And if he repents, forgive him. And if 7 times every day he repents of his sins, forgive him all 7 of those times. In other words, implying, like, be limitless in your forgiveness, limitless in your mercy to those who are repentant to you, which is a really difficult thing. And so that's why I think we move into where the apostles then say to the Lord, "Increase our faith." I think for them, they understand this, and I could be totally wrong about this whole thing, but I think that they understand how difficult it is to forgive somebody 7 times a day, or in other words, to be limitless in your forgiveness. I don't know if you've ever tried this, that when people do something against you and they apologize, to say those words, "I forgive you." I don't know about you, but I know for me, it's much easier for me to try to pass it off, like, don't worry about it, or it's nothing, rather than to say, "I forgive you," because to say, "I forgive you," is to acknowledge this caused problems. This caused pain, it caused anger, this created what seemed like a debt that you owe me. And now for me to forgive you, to say, "You don't owe me anything. I forgive you for that." Those 3 words, they sometimes can be really difficult to let flow out of your mouth. And if you imagine that, that's just one time. Imagine it 7 times a day, every day. That's a tall task. And so the apostles naturally say, "Increase our faith." And what is the word for faith? It is the word pistis, which is, again, not just an intellectual thing. In fact, this is pistis is in Greek, and if you translate that Greek word pistis into Hebrew, you know what you end up with is emuna, that word for faithfulness that we saw in our first reading from Habakkuk. So when the disciples or the apostles are saying, "Increase our faith," they're ultimately saying, "Increase our faithfulness, increase our trust in you, increase our trust so that we can entrust ourselves to you all the more confidently." So in other words, they're like, from my perspective, they're hearing this challenging teaching from Jesus, and they're just like, "Lord, you gotta make us faithful to you." That's so hard to actually move on that and to actually do those things. That is so hard. And so increase our faithfulness, increase our trust in you. And so then the Lord then, he takes that and he says, "Okay, well, here's the deal. If you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you would say to this mulberry tree, 'Be uprooted and planted in the sea,' and it would obey you." What is the mustard seed? Well, we know in other places that Jesus says the mustard seed is the smallest of all seeds. And there are plenty of people today who would say, "Well, actually, that's not the smallest of all seeds." Okay, great. But the point that Jesus is talking about is that everyone knows that this is a super small seed, and yet it creates this this big branch or this big shrub, this big tree. And so the point here of Jesus saying, like, look, even if your faith is very small, if you have faithfulness that is even very small, you can do something that is impossible. To say to this mulberry tree, be uprooted and planted in the sea. I just learned this. A mulberry tree or a sycamore tree, there's different translations of this word. It's known to have a wide and deep root system. In fact, there were laws among, I think in the Mishnah or something like that, about planting trees near cisterns, near wells. Because if you plant them too close, then the roots can get into the wells and like break them down and cause problems. And so for like a normal tree, you have to plant it like 25 cubits away. You can't be any closer than 25 cubits or something like that, which is, I don't know what, like 50 feet, not quite 50, maybe 40 feet, something like that. Anyway, but for a mulberry tree or sycamore tree, you have to be further away because the root system is so wide and so deep. And that's significant because if you've ever tried to uproot something like a weed in your garden, or if you've ever tried to pull out a tree from the ground, you know that the wider the roots are and the deeper into the soil that they go, the more difficult it is to uproot that thing. So Jesus is saying, here's an example of a tree that we know has a wide and deep root system that causes more problems, or the roots get into more places than the average tree does. And the Lord's saying, if you have even a tiny bit of faith, you're going to be able to take this tree and uproot it and plant it in the sea, which is also something that doesn't normally happen, that trees are planted in the sea. And the point here, because people will read this and they'll be like, oh, but I tried to do this. And the point that Jesus is making is not that you could actually do this. The point is that even the smallest bit of faith can do the impossible. So again, people perhaps are hearing this teaching from Jesus about forgiving 7 times a day. And they're like, that just seems too difficult. It seems too challenging. And so that leads the apostles to say, Lord, you gotta do this for us. And the Lord's just like, no, even if you have a small bit of faith, you can be faithful in what seems like impossible situations. You can be faithful. It's like he's encouraging them of like, you don't understand how powerful your faith in me is. There's like this power source in you that even a small amount of it can like level up your life in the most incredible of ways. If you trust, if you just have a little bit of faith to respond in faithfulness. Anyways, that's a really neat thing. Okay, so then from there we move into like a second parable, which is to say, who among you would say to your servant who has just come in from plowing or tending the sheep? Okay, so this is where things get tricky, because I think we want to say in our current culture in the United States, and maybe just in modern world, I think we want to answer Jesus differently than they would have answered Jesus. The way that Jesus anticipates these answers when he says, okay, who would say to your servant after plowing or tending sheep in the fields, come here immediately and take your place at table? I think we would want to, let's wait for what we would say. They're like, no, of course not. This is the servant. This is the hired slave who's there to serve. He's there to do what is necessary. And so like, no, of course we're not going to do that. No, of course he's going to say to him, prepare something for me to eat. You just came in from working, I know, but you're my hired servant. And so go to work for me. And then when he says, is he grateful to that servant because he did what was commanded? That word grateful, charis, is like, does he give a gift to him because he did what was commanded? Again, at the time of Jesus, they're like, no, like this is a normal thing. And that's why Jesus then says, so should it be with you. When you have done all you have been commanded, say, we are unprofitable servants. We have done what we were obliged to do. Like they've had this natural understanding of like, no, this person is a hired servant and he's indebted. So when it says that we are unprofitable servants, we have done what we were obliged to do. That word is ophelo, which could also be translated as debt. No, I'm indebted to you. And so I'm just here to pay off my debt. I'm just here to do what I need to do in order to be faithful, in order to carry out my duty. Another translation of unprofitable servants is, we are worthless slaves. I'm so indebted to you that I'm just a worthless slave to you. I'm just here to be dutiful. And so Jesus is ultimately getting at, like, don't expect congratulations, because to be faithful to him, yes, it's important, obviously, but it doesn't go beyond duty. Like, it is a matter of duty that we would follow after him. And so in some ways we could say like, okay, these men have been chosen to follow Jesus so closely, and so maybe they're starting to think that they're really special. And Jesus is just like, no, you're not actually that special. You're just being faithful to what I've called you to do, to what God has desired you to do. That's the point. But as I was studying this, I was just thinking, I think in our current world we would just respond differently. When it says, is he grateful to that servant because he did what was commanded? I think we would say, well, he should be grateful. He should give a gift. We do this all the time. And I'm not saying think of like going to a restaurant. The servants are there to serve you, and there's an expectation that you give a tip. And I'm not saying that tipping is wrong. Whatever, tips are good. But like that carries with it this expectation. Or people who serve in the church, I think sometimes there can be this expectation of like, well, I serve the Lord, I serve the church, and he owes me for that, or the church owes me for that. And if I'm not thanked by the church, if I'm not thanked by Father, or if there's not a clear, like if I'm not given blessing upon blessing in my life, then there's something wrong with God. There's something wrong with the church. And what Jesus is getting at is like, no, that can't actually be our expectation. And that's hard, I think, because it just goes in the face of this culture maybe that we've built up in the church today, which is a culture that expects gratitude, that expects congratulations, that expects gifts. And really, like, the Lord, I think, is trying to help us, maybe just like they perhaps were getting to a point of feeling, thinking. The Lord is trying to help us get back to that place of like, no, you're not doing this for the praise of men and women. You're not doing this for the benefits that are additional that I might provide for you. You're doing this because I've already provided you with the greatest benefit, which is eternal life. And you sometimes forget, the Lord might say to us, you sometimes forget how indebted you are to me. Because, again, going back to our opening collect, even the smallest sin is an offense against my goodness, my kindness. And you forget sometimes how offensive that is to me. And that's just the smallest sin. Never mind grave sins, mortal sins. So anyway, I think it's challenging in a way that, I don't know, maybe Jesus always knew that it was going to be challenging. But maybe not. Maybe it's challenging in a new way today than it was back then. I don't know. But nonetheless, it's a challenge that's worth embracing and just saying, okay, this is from the Lord, and I'm going to receive it and accept it. And at the end of the day, I want to say with them, I'm an unprofitable servant. And I'm not seeking to be spiritually prideful, but I'm just seeking to remind myself that I am radically indebted to the Lord for all the goodness that he's provided for me, goodness that I actually don't deserve. And so everything that I receive, I'm going to be grateful for it and seek to serve him all the more. Great, excellent. So we've got one more reading to go here from the second letter of St. Timothy. So we were in 1 Timothy, now we're moving into the second letter of St. Timothy. We will see you soon. Peace.